Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, and in this video we're going to be doing cash or pass, deciding if I'm going to continue with my ongoing series. Video idea comes courtesy of iSamwise, whose 20 series video where he decided whether or not he was going to continue with them was my inspiration. So he basically went through a bunch of the series that he's reading and talked about whether or not he wanted to proceed with the series, and then decided, just talked a little bit about what the series was about and why he was going to continue it or drop it. So for the purposes of my video, I've just got 3 tiers for today. We've got cash, which is just acquire it, secret it away, put it on the TBR cart, something I definitely want to read and want to add to my collection. We've got the maybe, so I can weasel out of some things. And then we've got pass. I do not want to continue this series. I have no desire to move forward with these books. Before we get started, just a couple of ground rules, some things that I decided would help me limit the number of books I would have to talk about. The first limit to the criteria is that I have to have already started the series. So I will do a separate video about new series that I definitely need to check out in the future. But this is about whether or not I want to continue a series. So it has to be something that I've already started. Criteria number 2 is another book already has to be out. So I have to be able to pick up the next book in the series, or else I just dropped it from the list. So so despite my love for Emily Wilde, the last book is not out, or the third book is not out, and so I did not put it on the list. I limited myself to fantasy and sci-fi because adding in just any genre left it open for a number of series that would add more time to the list. And so I wanted to stick with just fantasy and sci-fi titles for now. I also didn't add any manga or graphic novels because that would make the list far too long and it would not be very engaging. It would just be like Kaiju number 8, yeah, I want to continue reading it. One Piece, yes, I want to continue reading it. Something is Killing the Children, yes, I want to keep reading it. And it would not be very fun. So also, I did not count anything that I had read for class because largely I'm not really interested in those books. I'm reading them more to be able to converse with my students about them and check their work when they turn in reflections on what they've read. And so those just did not count. And then finally, the last criteria, and probably the most subjective, is it has to actually be a sequel and not a standalone book. So, for example, I know Ghost Station is kind of a sequel to a book I've read, but because they take place in the same universe, but it's not a continuation of the same character story, and it's not even listed as a series on Goodreads. So a good number of titles that maybe are tangentially related to things I've read could be considered standalone sequels are not going to be on the list. I believe Goblin Emperor also has a sequel that is basically just set in the same world, has none of the same characters, none of the same court intrigue. So basically a completely different book. I did not count those. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the titles we have here. I'm just going to move through, talk about them briefly, and my reaction to whether or not I want to proceed with this series. The first one we have is Axis. This is a sequel to Spin. This is one that I don't think I'm going to continue. Not that Spin wasn't a good book, but it was one of these harder sci-fi series that tend to take me a very long time to read through, and I don't feel like there was enough there to hold my interest into a second book. I feel like I got everything out of that world and out of that story that I wanted to. And so I was satisfied just reading Spin. I wasn't even aware that this was a trilogy of books until I started making this list. And so I just have no real strong desire to return to this. Maybe sometime in the future, but definitely not now. The second one we have here is Ghostsmith. This is the second book in the House of the Dead series. I got the first book, Bonesmith, out of a Fairy Loot box. I read it right around the same time that I was reading Gideon the Ninth, and I felt like it was kind of a YA or maybe a little bit more approachable story in that same style with a focus on this like necromantic energy and necromantic magic. I found it decent. Enough that I'm interested in looking up the Ghostsmith, but I think it's going to end up being fairly far down the list of ones that I'm going to cache at some point. I'm going to collect. I will also say I've heard some negative things about the sprayed edges of the Fairy Loot edition, which is likely what I would strive to pick up because my other edition is a Fairy Loot edition. And so it's a little disheartening to already know and have seen the lower quality of that sprayed edge. So that kind of dampens my excitement for the title. All right, the next one here is another one of these heavier sci-fi books. This is Poseidons Wake, the third book in the Poseidon's Children trilogy. Now, I've already read, this is the third book in the series, and I've already read the first two, but I did read them out of order. However, I don't know if that super matters. So I read On the Steel Breeze first, and then I read which is the second book in the series, and then I went back and read Blue Remembered Earth after I realized that On the Steel Breeze was a sequel to another book. And the nice thing about this trilogy is it's generational, so it's kind of like what we were talking about with that standalone sequel, but not really. So the nice thing about reading it out of order was that it didn't really hamper my enjoyment of either of the books, and I could still see the connections between the two. It was like reading a prequel after reading a original book, but it's still, I would consider it a sequel because it is dealing with the same family and the same line, and the characters show up in multiple books, so I would still count it. This is one that, again, I think is going to go into the cache, but we're going to do so sometime in the future, because these are, again, heavier sci-fi concepts. They're very dense, and they take a long time for me to get through. I really have to stop and think about them, and so that will be one that I have to be in the right mood for, but I'm definitely interested in finishing off that series. I think Alastair Reynolds is an amazing author. I love his short fiction work a bit more than his novels, but I've already invested quite a bit of time into this one, and I like the characters, I like the story. I am very interested to see where it goes after the conclusion of On the Steel Breeze as well. The next one is Waking Gods. This is the second book in the Themis Files, I believe that's how it's pronounced, series. This one is definitely going to get picked up at some point. I really enjoyed the first book. I believe it was Sleeping Giants. I really enjoyed that book. This is an epistolary book about humanity finding these giant ancient robots, kind of like hidden technology or lost technology kind of thing, alien technology. Sci-fi, yes, but not heavy in the way that Alastair Reynolds is, or that Spin was, and so a lot more digestible, I feel, and much more of a page turner. They're also on the shorter side. that's also appealing to me right now. I need something to decompress from the epic series that I've been reading through. So, definitely one that I will take a look at some point. I really do want to get back into that series. It just has not happened and it's gotten pushed back because of other things. Next up, we have the House Witch 2. The House Witch books all look the same. This is I believe this is self-published book about a witch whose powers are tied to like food and cooking and like basically like housekeeping and things like that. I found the first book very odd with its tone, very inconsistent with a number of things. It was trying to be cozy fantasy, but it had some high fantasy elements in it. It had some conflict that I would not want to see in a cozy fantasy. It also just had some really infantile humor and some really weird chapters where the cat that he keeps is secretly like this noir detective cat. There's a chapter from his perspective where all the other cats are talking, and it was a choice. And so this is an absolutely not. This is a pass, and I will never pick that up. I do not have any interest in reading the rest of the series. Too long, inconsistent, did not care for it at all. The next one is Authority. This is the second book in the Southern Reach series. I really did like the first book, and especially the subjective nature of it and how you could definitely have different interpretations of what's going on. It's one that I want to pick up for sure, but it's going to be a while. Where would I put this? I also feel like the first book did tell a complete story, and so that was I'm not sure where it's going to go from here. I know it's a trilogy, and so I'm wanting it for the vibes. Unlike Axis, where I felt like Spin was a complete story and I don't want to get any more of it, this one I felt like the first book was a complete story, but I still want to go back to this world. I still want to experience more of this paranoia and this feeling of subjective reality and questioning the narrator as they're going through the zone. So I'm gonna put this probably after Waking Gods, but before Poseidon's Reach. Next up, we have Mallerie. This is the sequel to Bird Box. This falls in line with the same thing that Axis has, where the first book was enough for me. I don't need a sequel. I don't feel like it's going to add anything, and I've read some things about the differences between this book and the first book, and it just seems like it's going in a direction that I do not care to read. So it's going to go here. I'd rather read Axis, but really I don't have any interest in either one of these. Even more so than Axis, I have no desire to head back into this world, and I don't care for what I've heard is happening in the sequel. Much in that same vein, we have Stay in the Light, which is the sequel to The Watchers. I picked up The Watchers due to the hype around the film, and I liked what I read. I do feel like the big twist for the book was telegraphed a little bit too hard for me, and I don't feel... This is another one where I feel like it's right along the lines of all these others right here in a row of I don't have any real interest in continuing this story. I don't see what a sequel can really add to it, and I'm worried that just like Mallerie, where I know the monsters, the way they work in Mallerie is going to be changed somewhat. They're going to like evolve. I imagine the same is true for Stay in the Light. What I've heard of it is a similar idea where we're going to try to expand the lore on these monsters, and the more that you talk about them, the more you reveal about the monsters, the less threatening they become, the less interesting they become. I really do like these books when you first start out and you don't know much about it. The longer they go, the more that's revealed about them, the less interesting it becomes. So a sequel is just not a good idea for me. The next one is Where the Library Hides. This is the second book in the Secrets of the Nile series, the first of which is What the River Knows, which again was a Fairy Loot box book for me. I've seen some YouTubers, some booktubers start to review this. This is going to be a maybe for me. I'm going to wait and see what the reviews say, maybe go on Goodreads and try to read a few spoiler-free reviews just to get a sense of where the story goes, because it's one of those that, depending on what the focus of the second book is, it could really make or break whether or not I want to take a look at it. There were definitely aspects of the first book that I really enjoyed. I especially appreciated the setting. I don't think that enough stories are set in Egypt and dealing with Egyptian mythology. That seems to be one of the ones that we kind of falls to the wayside. I also felt the world was very intriguing in that it's mostly a parallel to our Earth, but there is magic, and it's kind of treated as commonplace, which I thought was a really interesting take on the concept of magic. The romance, I feel, was hit or miss, and that would really be the breaking point for whether or not I want to pick up this book, is how much does the sequel focus on the relationship versus how much does it focus on the mysteries that I'm much more invested in that series. Next up, we have The Blinding Knife. This is the second in the Lightbringer series. I recently reread The Black Prism as part of my Epic Series Summer, and I'm getting back into that. The first book ends on quite a big cliffhanger or revelation, and so it really does make me excited to read the sequel. The audiobook has rotated into my queue a couple of times, and I just haven't gotten around to it, but it's definitely one that I'm going to continue. I'm going to place it, I think, I'm going to place it here. It's definitely intriguing me. I do want to return to the Themis Files a little bit more than I want to do The Blinding Knife at the moment, only because I'm a little bit burnt out on high fantasy, having gone through so much of the Cosmere stuff and going through Lightbringer, going through Dresden. So I'm a little bit more interested in going back to the Themis Files than I am The Blinding Knife. Harrow the Ninth is one that I started the audiobook on, and the second person narration kind of got me, and I decided I really needed to read that physically. So this is the second book in the what is this one? The Locked Tomb series. So it's the second book in the Lost Tomb series, and I really enjoyed Gideon the Ninth, but I thought that the beginning of Harrow was very confusing, and I really need to sit down with the book. However, I will say that my friend is also reading through this at the moment, and that is definitely pushing my desire to get this read higher than it otherwise would be. So this is going to be actually at the top of our cash list. I definitely want to get this read soon. I've got a couple of other things I want to get through, but it's definitely close to the top of my list of what I want to take a look at. The next one here is Never a Hero. This is the sequel to Always a Villain. I believe the series is just called the Villain series. And this is a YA series about a character who is a monster, and she has her monster family, and there was there was a prophecy that this hero was going to come and basically dismantle everything. There are characters that can see the future, but the future is really fuzzy. It dealt a lot with the ideas of like destiny and fate and how much control you have over your life. I enjoyed Always a Monster quite a bit, and I was especially taken aback by the twist toward the end, especially for a YA series. I thought that it was remarkably dark and rather surprising what the protagonist was willing to do in order to get what they wanted in the end. And so this one is going to be another one that's on my cash list, but it's going to be a bit farther down. I think at the moment this is going to go right here between Authority and Poseidon's Wake. Yeah, that feels like a good place. That's about where I want it to be. The next title is Volatile Bonds. This is the fourth book in the Prospero War series, another one that I was reading for Epic Series Summer, and one that I probably would already have read by now if I hadn't somehow misplaced my copy at work. And so I took this into work on one of our work days, set it down somewhere, and just lost track of it, and I looked everywhere for it, couldn't find it. So this is definitely one that I want to read, and it's going to get a little bit of a bump because I also have already started it and really want to get this series finished. So I think this is actually going to be just below Harrow the Ninth as far as what I want to get read. This follows, I believe the name of the main character is Kate, as she is dealing with a world where magic is basically drugs. So it's a lot of, think like CSI, but with magic. And she is dealing with a lot of gang activity and crime lords and things like that, but everything's centered around the idea that like magic potions are addictive and they do certain things for you, but then they also have a cost. She used to work for one of the gangs. She was a cooker, so she cooked up illegal spells, and so she knows a lot of like the inside material, the insider knowledge about the different gangs that are in the city. And so a pretty good one if you're a fan of that kind of storytelling and that kind of series. So one that I've been wanting to get finished for a while, and that's again, it's frustrating that I misplaced my copy. I really want to get that read. The next one here is Stranger Skies. This is the second book in the Drowned Gods series. And the first book, I know I have a review of it up on my channel. It is one that I felt was overly long, had a perspective character that I felt was unnecessary. The fact that we got internal monologue for our protagonist was problematic in that she is manipulating the other character intentionally, and I felt like it was squandered a lot of the potential storytelling for its magic system. So unsurprisingly, this is going to go on the pass level, although it's going to be higher up. I could maybe be convinced if someone tells me this is absolutely amazing to look into it. But as is, based on what I remember from the first book, it is just not something that I am clamoring for and something that I want to continue. Peace Talks is the 16th book in the Dresden Files series, and to the surprise of no one, that is definitely going to go into my want to read. I'm going to put it a couple of notches down only because I can't read it yet. I am still on book 11 of my read through, and so I need to get through a few more titles before I can get to Peace Talks. The idea was to reread the series and then finally catch up with the last two books, Peace Talks and Battlegrounds, and be caught up with the series by the time that Mirror Mirror comes out. I believe that's the next title in the series. But Dresden Files is something I've been consuming and reading since college. one that I'm definitely going to keep track with, and I want to continue. So it's pretty high on the list, but Peace Talk specifically is going to take a little while because we've got a few more titles to get through before I get to this point. End in Truth releases on December 6th, but there's already advanced chapters available on the Reactor magazine webpage that I am reading through. So this is one that I'm definitely getting. I've already reserved my copy. I'm already reading it technically. And so it's going to be highest on my list of cash. I definitely want to get this one and read it. I am on a big Cosmere kick right now, but I think after Wind and Truth, I might need to take a break from that for a while, just because these are such massive books, and the Cosmere is so sprawling and epic. I need something that's a little bit shorter and a little bit easier to read. For those who don't know, Wind and Truth is the 5th book in Stormlight Archives. This is Brandon Sanderson's biggest series of books. The title, each individual title is somewhere between like 12 and 1400 pages, depending on the type you pick up, whether it's a hardcover or a paperback. And they are just this massive epic on the planet of Roshar. It deals with storylines that ripple across the whole Cosmere. You can really get into it and really get sucked into that world. So, and I have, and it's something that I definitely going to continue. And in fact, I'm continuing right now. All right, next up on the list is Carl's Doomsday Scenario. This is the sequel to Dungeon Crawler Carl, which I read earlier this year, relatively recently, and I really enjoyed it. I like the lit RPG elements of it. At the moment, this might go here. Only because, again, after all the very long, epic series that I've been reading lately, I might need a little bit of a break and something a little less serious, a little more playful to kind of use as a palate cleanser before I get into some of these other, not as lengthy or as sprawling necessarily, but still rather serious titles. So I think that's where I'm going to put it for now. Definitely one I want to continue, and one that is probably fairly soon I will pick it up because I need some of that levity to get over the very serious titles I've been reading recently. The only thing about this series that kind of intimidates me is the length of it. There are already several books out. I'm very far behind, and so to try to think about catching up is... I gotta kind of put that out of my mind and just think about, I want to read the next one, and then we'll see how it goes from there. Obelisk is the second book in the Broken Earth series. I read the first of these books, the 5th season, earlier this year, and I was so on it. The twist at the end was a little surprising. It kind of made sense as to some of the odd decisions that were made as far as the writing goes. But this is one that I'm not super excited for. I don't recall the end of the 5th season being particularly gripping or leading to something that I just had to read what happens next. So I'm going to put this one on the maybe. I could probably be talked into picking this up, but I need to look into it a bit more than I have and figure out what story they're telling and why I should be invested in continuing that story. So not quite as reluctant to read it as I am with like Axis or Stay in the Light, but not super excited about it. I would need to look it up and get some more convincing before I pick this one up. Drown Me with Dreams is the sequel to Sing Me to Sleep, which is another one of the books that I got in the Fairy Loot box subscription, and I think it's going to be another duology. That's a really popular thing right now with the YA titles. It's going to go here on the maybe list. I remember quite a bit of Sing Me to Sleep, and I remember the main character being someone who is surprisingly vicious for a YA protagonist, which was surprising. And I would probably read more about that character, but it's another one of those situations where I am going to need to look into it and see what the sequel's about. I've had some of these duologies that just did not work for me, which we'll talk about in a second. So yeah, this is going to be one that I have to look into and be get a little bit more convinced before I pick it up. Ami is the second in the Guardian of Dawn series. The first book in the series was Zara, and Zara got 5 stars from me. I liked the mix of the kind of like Sailor Moon aesthetic and anime aesthetic, some of the Japanese folklore elements in it, as well as a storyline that seemed focused not on like defeating our enemy, but on trying to change them and purify them. And so I was very excited about Ami. I have a copy of it already. I'm definitely going to read it. It's just a matter of where am I going to put it on this list. I think right now my gut's telling me probably right there. It'll probably be the thing I read right after I'm done with Wind and Truth, as well as a couple of other things I need to get taken care of. But it's definitely high on the list. I'm very much looking forward to it. I like the style that they're going with as far as how the story is progressing. It is not a standalone sequel, but I do believe it's going to largely follow characters that we had not heard of from book 1. But the ultimate goal is that all these disparate characters are going to come together and form the Guardians of Dawn, kind of like Sailor Scouts unite against evil and eventually get to the point where we have the epic final confrontation with the villain of the series. Next up, we have the Blood Orchid, the second book in the Scarlet Alchemist series. This one is another one that I'm going to put on the maybe pile, and I'm going to put it rather far down. And the reason why is because I've read the synopsis for Blood Orchid. I read obviously I read the first book, and the first book ends with the suggestion that the way the story is going to move forward is by drastically upping the stakes of the first book. I read another series, another duology that did a very similar thing in a Magic Steeped in Poison, and then a Venom Dark and Sweet. And because of the dramatic shift in focus from book 1 to book 2, the events in book 1 were rendered almost irrelevant because we had so dramatically upped the stakes in the second book that it seemed like nothing we really did in the first book super mattered. And I'm really worried that the Blood Orchid is kind of going along the same path of really ramping up the scope of book 2 to the point where the starting point of book 1 will seem completely irrelevant in comparison. And so I'm not excited to read this book. The issue is, if I do pick it up, I really want the Fairy Loot copy. I do not care for the cover art on here with just the regular releases. So it's one of those that I need to make up my mind soon. I need to be convinced soon. But at the moment, it's not one that I am super excited for. And then finally, we have The Republic of Thieves. This is the third book in the Gentleman Bastard series. This one's also going to go in maybe, but it's going to go at the very top of the maybe pile. I did not care for the second Gentleman Bastard book, Red Seas Under Red Skies. I think that's the title. I felt like the flash forward at the beginning of the book served no real narrative purpose. It was a real like gotcha when it came around again toward the end of the book. I felt like so much of the book was doing the exact opposite of what the first book did. The characters spent the whole time like trying to get over on this other person, and then that just didn't end up happening. So narratively, it was not very satisfying. These again are not short books, so it's a big investment in time. And I'm not sure that I'm the biggest fan of the characters in this series. So this is another one that I would need some convincing. I would need someone to tell me that this is an amazing title, that it's a really strong return to what the first book, what made the first book so strong. But I don't need that much convincing. So, like I said, it's at the top of the maybe pile. And I think it's the only other one in the series that's out so far. I know he has plans. I know the author has plans for several more sequels, but I think this is the last one that's actually out that I could get, and so that also makes it tempting to read because I'd be caught up with another series. Those are my thoughts on the 22 series that I am currently reading, whether or not I will continue them, drop them, or who knows, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I hope your reading journey is going well, whether you read expansive epic series or standalone titles. Whether you're reading fantasy, sci-fi, or fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter, as long as you are having a good time. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our BookTube community. I hope your reading journey is going well, and until the next one, take care.